Hello and welcome to EAB University this morning. This is Robin Osborne, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Elizabeth Barnes and Cliff Sadoff from Purdue University and Amy Stone from The Ohio State University, we welcome you to today's webinar, Forest Invaders to Watch For and How to Manage Them, Part 2, Spotted Lanternfly, Gypsy Moth, and Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. Today, we welcome your comments and questions, and we would like you to either put them in the Q&A or the chat pod, and we will be answering these questions at the end of the webinar so we can continue with the webinar and make the presentation go along smoothly. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for watching afterwards on the www.emeraldashborer.info website. Today, our speakers are Elizabeth Barnes and Cliff Sadoff, as well as Carrie Tusher from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. After this webinar is through, I will be sending you an email tomorrow that has a link for a confidential voluntary survey that we'd like you to fill out so that we can continue to get feedback on what kinds of topics you'd like to see on EAB University. And also, there will be instructions on how to get continuing education credits, as well as contact information for all the panelists. So with that being said, we thank you all for joining us today. And Elizabeth, you can begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin. So I wanted to start out today by mentioning that last week we had part 1. You don't need to have watched part 1 in order to understand this week. I just thought I'd mention it in case anyone was looking for information about emerald ash borer, thousand cankers disease, or Asian longhorn beetle. That will be uploaded and posted in the same place as Robin mentioned earlier. And with that, I'm going to jump right into it with gypsy moth today. So this image of gypsy moth was taken a couple summers ago in northern Indiana. I was there, and basically the whole street in this neighborhood looked like this. This is midsummer when these trees should have been full of leaves, and as you can see, they've been absolutely stripped of them. So gypsy moth is a periodic pest here that most years causes relatively minor damage, but when we have outbreaks, they can pack quite a punch. So you're most likely to notice gypsy moths in their larval stage when they're walking around as caterpillars. Where I am right now in central Indiana, they should have already started hatching. That's going to vary a little bit depending on where you are. If you're a bit north of here, it might be in a couple weeks. If you're a bit south, they might have already been out and feeding for a while. So I would recommend just double checking what the dates will actually look like in your area. When they fully develop around mid-June, they will pupate and stay as pupa for 10 to 14 days. Then in late July or late August, we see them flying around as moths. And then finally, in late July and August, they start laying their eggs and then overwinter as eggs. So as you can see, really the caterpillar stage is the easiest stage to recognize them. Both the pupal stage and the adult stage look an awful lot like a whole bunch of other caterpillars, a whole bunch of other moths that we have that are native. They don't cause a lot of damage. They're actually really important for the ecosystem. So if you're not an experienced lepidopterist, I wouldn't recommend looking for gypsy moths in either the pupal stage or the adult stage. The eggs can be a little bit easier to spot in outbreak years, but in non-outbreak years, they can be kind of hard to tell the difference between gypsy moth eggs or a few, again, native insects that lay similar egg masses. So with that, I'm going to focus on the caterpillars for the ID portion. They are blue-black for most of their body. They're very fuzzy, and they have blue or red bumps on their backs. The blue bumps are in the first 4 rows on the caterpillar, and then the last several rows are red bumps. They do get confused pretty easily with some native caterpillars. One of them is a native butterfly that it's kind of pointy rather than furry. So if you look at the caterpillar and it looks soft, not that you should touch it, but if you look at the caterpillar and it looks soft, might be a gypsy moth. That's a point in the gypsy moth column. But if you look at it and it looks kind of sharp and pointy like a wild rose, it may actually be this native caterpillar. So if it looks soft to the touch, might be a gypsy moth. If it looks like it would hurt to touch it, it might be this native butterfly. Then if it is kind of soft and fuzzy, the next thing to look for are those, the bumps on its back, the blue and red bumps. There are a bunch of native caterpillars that are kind of furry in a similar way, but they don't have those bumps. So anyway, if you're not sure, I am happy to take a look. I love caterpillar IDs, so feel free to send me an email with a picture, and I can check it out for you. Okay, so what do they actually eat? They strongly prefer oaks, especially white oaks. That's what they'll go for first. They will also eat maple, hickory, witch hazel, pine, spruce, and several other species. Carrie will get into that in a little bit more detail later. But they do not like ash, tulip tree, black locust, and black walnut. So those ones are luckily pretty much safe from gypsy moth. For the trees that they will eat, there's a pretty big dividing line in how we look at it between deciduous trees, so trees that lose their leaves in the fall, versus trees that hold on to their needles or leaves. For deciduous trees, if they're defoliated for a single year, and they're otherwise healthy and nothing else bad happens to that tree, they're probably going to be okay. If they're defoliated 2 years in a row, that's when we start seeing those trees die. Or if they're defoliated and then they are stressed in some other way or already sickly in some other way, like disease, or they have experienced drought, that can also kill a deciduous tree in a single year. If you have something like a pine or a spruce that holds onto its needles, those trees can die in a single year of defoliation. So if you do have an outbreak, I would be particularly worried about pines and spruces that you're seeing gypsy moth on, and you really need to act quickly if you have caterpillars on those trees. I'm not going to go into too many details about how to treat for gypsy moth. If you want to know more either about what I was just saying about defoliation or how to treat for gypsy moth, I recommend looking at the Purdue Landscape Report. It has some great articles on this topic. But just as a quick overview, for gypsy moth eggs, you can scrape or spray them in either the late summer or really any time through the winter before they hatch. For caterpillars, you can band trees with burlap bands or use insecticides whenever you notice the presence of these caterpillars. And if you're going to organize a group of people to do aerial spraying, the best time to plan for that is really late summer or winter when you think there's going to be an outbreak the next year, and then actually starting to do that spraying in the second week of May, at least around here, which is around Mother's Day. So again, if you want more details about that, check out the Purdue Landscape Report. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie.
See if it will take my mouse click. So here's just a quick list of hosts that are either fed on or commonly used for larval feeding. See if it'll move forward for me.
Yay.
Yay, there we go. So I only have a few minutes to cover this. So we're going to cover the primary ones first. So oaks are one of the species that I see gypsy moth on a pretty regular basis, and they're the ones that homeowners and residents are going to be most aware of. Generally speaking, two really easy Identification characteristics. Oaks have alternate branching and clustered buds at the apex of the twig. So at the tip of the twig, there's always a cluster of buds, usually around 5 or more. And then between the two oak groups, the red oaks and the white oaks have rounded lobes and, oop.
Sorry, Carrie, I was trying to mute myself.
It's okay. White oaks have rounded lobes and their acorns have bumpy caps. So over here on the right. And then red oaks have bristle-tipped lobes. So at the tip of each of these little lobes, there's going to be kind of like a little spur or bristle type protrusions that extend beyond the leaf margin. And the caps of their acorns are generally flat and scaly. Sweet. Malus species, your apples and your crab apples. This was something when I lived in Wisconsin, was really, really common that we would get gypsy moth feeding on malus. So anything, if you're in kind of the northeast area of the US, you've got crab apples and apples flowering right now. And stereotypical serrated leaf margin, this kind of subparallel venation, and 5-petaled flowers are kind of the easiest identification characteristics for malus. Crategus, again, in the same vein of plants, Pomaceae, up in here on the upper right is kind of the stereotypical landscape hawthorn. There are multiple native hawthorns in North America, and so it is possible that you might have some of the less compact varieties, but just some examples of the fruit. They can have these thorns, and the leaf varies pretty broadly, so you're going to have to take a look at using an ID key to get the specifics. They are also susceptible hosts to cedar apple rust, and so their little fruits might have those little jelly protrusions in late summer. Okay, sweet gum. For us here in Indiana, they're just starting to leaf out, but the little pokey birdbeak balls, rough craggedy bark, I do see them used pretty heavily for egg mass laying. Bright, beautiful, red to burgundy fall foliage, and the star-shaped leaf that can be confused with maple, but these have very, very distinct lobes with very pointed tips, and some fine serration along the margin of all those leaves. So hopefully a helpful identification characteristic. All of our poplars, so it actually on the USDA site lists aspen and poplar and cottonwood all separate, but they're all poplars. So quaking aspen, big tooth aspen, white poplar, which is not native, cottonwood, these are all susceptible for feeding. It's not preferred. I generally see egg mass laying on cottonwoods. For this whole group, one of the really helpful identification characteristics is if you can get a leaf in your hand, the petiole, the little leaf stem, is actually flat. And so you can't roll it in your fingers. It'll flop back and forth, but it won't roll. And that is what gives kind of the trembling, really active leaf movement when the wind blows, and should be a helpful characteristic to you. Also, all of these, their seeds are very, very small, and can travel in the air and on the water. So that white fuzz is another indicator. Tillia, so our lindens, and that could be American basswood, or it could be any of the little leaf lindens that you might have. When I teach little kids, the shape of the leaf is the shape of the tree, generally speaking, especially with small landscape-sized trees. This non-equal leaf base, I think that's oblique, is one of the characteristics that I'm looking for. but honestly, if you have a whole specimen, the little nutlets and their little winged helicopter tops are what I use. These will start blooming generally in June to July. Have a beautiful, sweet fragrance, and these will be persistent on the tree throughout the season. So something to look for in as an indicator. They're really, really obvious if they have a heavy fruit load. And then our willows. So this is just kind of like your stereotypical landscape weeping willow, very, very thin, strappy leaves with serrated margins and a single prominent mid-vein. The buds are held with a single or sometimes 3 bud scales tight to the twig. And in most cases, you're gonna find them on, landscape specimens. So your weeping willows are generally gonna be the ones that you notice them on, but they can be on black and some of the other more scrubby riparian species. Woohoo!
All right, I'm going to hop back on now. Whoops. Let's see if I'll move my slide back. Okay, so I'm going to talk about spotted lanternfly now. For those of you that have heard of spotted lanternfly, it's probably all been bad news. For those of you who haven't heard of it, I'm sorry, this is going to be a depressing few slides coming up. So this is a female spotted lanternfly. You can tell because she's got that typical bright coloration on her wing, bright yellow on her abdomen. They're beautiful insects if you like insects. The downside, though, is that this is the typical density of spotted lanternfly. So this is what you will see on grapevines. And as you can imagine, that can be absolutely overwhelming for those trees. So I'm gonna start off kind of generally with where they came from. They were originally imported from Asia by accident on some stone that was brought over here. And if you look on the image on the side there, those things that look like spots of mud are actually spotted lanternfly egg masses. So you can really see how they could have been accidentally transported on the stone, and also how they might accidentally be transported in the future. They were first detected in 2014, and for the first couple of years, we thought we'd actually managed to escape an outbreak. But then really starting a few years ago, they absolutely exploded in numbers, and since then they've been rapidly spreading. So this was the distribution as of January 2020. There are a few counties that have been added since then. The yellow is where they've been found, but there's no infestation. And the red is where there's active infestations. You might be looking at this map and thinking to yourself, okay, why is someone based in Indiana telling me about this insect that seems to be mainly on the East Coast right now? Well, that is because of the potential future distribution of spotted lanternfly and just how quickly it's been spreading, and how easily it's been spreading. If you'll notice on this map, the red colors are the high suitability habitat, which just about completely covers my state, Indiana, but also a lot of the Midwest, the East Coast, and over in California and some of the northern states and the West Coast too. The medium distribution, the medium suitability is in yellow. And so that's covering even more areas. I don't have time to get into the details of how this map was created. I highly recommend checking out the paper though, if you're interested. The citation there is at the bottom of the screen, or if you can't find it later, just ask me and I will send a link to it. So here's the life cycle of spotted lanternfly. As you can see from a quick glance, it looks pretty different at different stages. When it first hatches out, it's pretty small, mostly black with some white spots. It stays that way all the way through the third instar. These instars sometimes will get confused with ticks. The big way you can tell the difference is, first off, ticks are very, very flat, whereas spotted lanternfly will kind of stand up on their legs and they have a slightly more rounded body. The other big difference is when you see them moving, spotted lanternfly generally will hop to move, whereas ticks tend to crawl along a surface. But when in doubt, send in a picture. With spotted lanternfly, we're really worried about this. So anytime you think you might see a spotted lanternfly, please do let us know. And I'll give you some more details on reporting later on. All right, moving on to the fourth instar. This is where it starts looking a little bit more flashy. It has some bright orange that you can see here. It's sort of an orangey, pinky red color on most of its body. Still has some of those white spots in the black patches. Then when it becomes an adult, this is when they start flying and you see those wings. The hind wings have this really distinctive bright orangey red color. There are spots on the forewings. And again, the abdomen for the females, when they start getting ready to produce eggs, those will swell up and turn yellow. And then they cycle on to the eggs. This image right here, just to kind of drive home the point, has 2 spotted lanternfly egg masses in it. I'll just give you a minute to kind of look around on that screen where you think they are. They are right there. So as you can see, they really blend in very easily. And this is one of the things we're really worried about, because you can easily imagine how that would get transported to a new location. The affected states are doing a really great job so far, working with people in that area to make sure that anything leaving an infested area is inspected, is treated how it needs to be treated to try and prevent its spread. But I will say, if you are either driving through, once all of the quarantines are over, if you are driving through an area that's currently has spotted lanternfly infestation, or if you are receiving goods from one of the affected states, I'd strongly recommend that you check those over as soon as you receive them, or if it's your vehicle, you inspect it as soon as you leave that infested area. And again, like I said, the people there are doing a great job inspecting things before they're shipped out, but it doesn't hurt to check again when you receive them to make sure that nothing accidentally got overlooked. Okay, moving on to their feeding pattern. Spotted lanternfly feed on phloem. So basically what they do is they take their little mouth parts, which are basically little tiny straws, and they stick them right into the trees. They then will drink the phloem and continually drink the phloem, which unfortunately has a nasty side effect. So hopefully the video is playing for you guys too, and you might be able to see, looks like water's raining down from the canopy of the tree. You might think, okay, so there's just a rainstorm going through. Nope, that is all honeydew from the spotted lanternfly, which is basically spotted lanternfly pee. It is this nasty, sticky solution that gets over everything underneath it. A lot of you might have experience with big outbreaks of aphids. If you have a bunch of aphids on a plant, you might notice that either the surface of the leaves or the area below gets kind of sticky. It's the same thing, but imagine those aphids scaled way up so that they're the size of your thumb. And there are still hundreds and hundreds of them on a single plant. That's what we're dealing with spotted lanternfly. So the whole ground underneath it gets covered with this honeydew. If you have property underneath, that property is now covered with honeydew. Sooty mold can grow on it. You have to be repeatedly cleaning it throughout the summer. If you have plants underneath, those plants can get covered in the honeydew. The sooty mold can prevent the plants from photosynthesizing, which can kill them. And in both cases, it can also attract secondary insects like hornets or ants that come to the area because of that, sweet sugar that they're looking for. All right. Okay, So what plants do they actually eat? Well, this is the really bad news. They eat grapes, like I've already mentioned, birch, maples, black walnuts, roses, and at least 70 other species, one of which luckily is tree of heaven, which is another invasive species. So one of the ways you can stop spotted lanternfly is you can try and remove your tree of heaven. But this is a really long list. This does change over the course of the season. So they tend to prefer things with thinner bark at the start of the season. So your roses, your grapes, and then switch over to black walnut around midsummer, and then your river birches, willows, sumacs, and then maples at the very end of the summer. They will also even sometimes move on to oaks at the very end of the year if you don't have a hard freeze, because the oaks will still have that phloem available to them at that point. Basically, these are the trees at the different times of year that you want to be inspecting for spotted lanternfly if you're trying to look for them in your area. Their impact on trees and woody plants. So far, they've been seeing some signs of stress. And before I go any further, I do want to emphasize that all of this is emerging research. This is all in very early stages. So, you know, try and keep abreast of changes in information about spotted lanternfly, because we're still figuring things out. But we are seeing early signs of stress on full-grown trees. They have a harder time storing nutrients if they're constantly losing phloem throughout the summer. It may also reduce growth or kill the trees or make them more susceptible to other issues. So kind of in some ways similar to what we discussed with gypsy moth. The bad thing with spotted lanternfly is they do, so far at least, come back year after year after year, and they tend to hit the same trees over and over and over again. And by that, I don't mean as much the same tree species as they will go after the same individual trees repeatedly. There's also some suggestion that it might affect seasonal regulation of trees, but they're not positive on that yet. This is all, again, early work. On crops, they will outright kill grapes. A lot of the growers in Pennsylvania have had to increase spraying. One of them reported that they had to go from spraying about 4 times a summer to 14 times. And they had to do that because it was a choice between either increasing the amount of money they were spending on spraying or just losing their entire large sections of their vineyard. They do seem to prefer field edges, so they will most of them will end up on the plants at the edge of the vineyard, and then that'll decrease as you get towards the center. But on those edges, you'll see, in some cases, 400 spotted lanternfly per vine. So there's a lot of variability there, but we're still figuring out exactly how that works. It's currently unclear how they impact fruit trees. I've heard from some people that spotted lanternfly is devastating on the trees in their orchards. I have heard from other people that their orchards have been perfectly fine. The spotted lanternfly don't seem interested in them. So right now that hasn't really been worked out why some people are being hit harder than others, but hopefully we'll know more about in the future. But in either case, another secondary problem is that the crops end up getting covered in honeydew. I'm just very briefly going to talk a little bit about some of the treatments for spotted lanternfly. If you want to know more, go to the Penn State Extension website. They have an excellent website with a lot of details about spotted lanternfly treatment, as well as basically any other spotted lanternfly information you might be looking for. I highly recommend it. They've done a great job with that website. So there are a range of chemical treatments that are very effective. This is the good news. It's really easy to kill an individual lanternfly. The bad news is you end up with repeated invasions of lanternflies because they are highly mobile and there are so many of them. So you kill them once, you end up getting another wave of them in the next day. Another issue is that you can end up with dead spotted lanternfly at the bottom of a tree that you've treated. I saw one photo that a guy who was treating trees in the affected area showed me, where he was able to stick his hand into a pile of dead spotted lanternfly so that it was all the way up, covering half of his hand, sticking straight down. And you can imagine that's gonna smell. that's going to be really unpleasant. So that's another downside of the treatment mechanisms we found so far. There's also some biocontrol potential. There are 2 parasitoids that they're currently testing in labs. They've seen mixed results on those so far. I'm not going to go into too many details, but again, feel free to reach out if you want more details. There are also 2 native funguses that have been attacking spotted lanternfly. And one of them is already part of biopesticides that are on the market for sale. And the early tests, so there's only been 1 summer of tests so far with this. I do want to caution about that, but the early results seem promising, and it seems like that might be a pretty effective way to keep them in check. Finally, I also wanted to mention before we move on that we were supposed to have the spotted lanternfly talk this spring, but with everything going on, our speaker had to cancel for the spring, but he should be back again in the fall to give a talk. So look for that, and we hope to have you join us then. Okay, and I'm going to hand things back to Carrie now to go over spotted lanternfly host plants.
Great. I'm going to try to cruise through that so we can stay on time. There we go. So again, apple is another target species, and that's across apples. So if and when you're scouting, looking at both fruiting apples and crab apples might be within your purview to take a look at. And generally anything in the Pomaceae family. So anything that has kind of seeds inside their fruit in little chambers. Tree of Heaven, everyone did a little woohoo, I can tell. But if you're not familiar with Tree of Heaven, they have very stout twigs with very large shield-shaped leaf scars. And these are just some examples of the variation of the leaf scars depending on where you are. The leaves look very similar to walnut. The big differentiating characteristic that you're going to look for is that they generally have 1 to 2 little teeth at the bottom of their leaflets. And that's very, very indicative of Tree of Heaven. Generally, the leaves are a little bit glossier than walnut or sumac. Their bark is kind of this kind of flat, bland gray with white zigzag striping. Someone at some point told me it looked like lightning strikes, but I never really saw it myself personally. If you can get your hand on a twig and you can crack it, the pith or the inner foamy part of the twig on Tree of Heaven is kind of a camel color, or we generally refer to it as peanut butter pith, because it's going to be this light buffy tan color and it smells. There's a very specific fragrance that comes off of a Tree of Heaven. If you do fracture or scratch it, just be aware that some people are sensitive to Tree of Heaven. The other thing is about midsummer, the seed heads come on, and these they look like big fluffy pom-poms up in the tree, and they can range anywhere from lime green to kind of coral pink. And those can be really, really helpful in identification. Lucky for us, we don't have to worry about confusion because black walnut is also a susceptible host. We went on over this for walnut twig beetle, but the large compound leaves, very similar to Ailanthus. The fruits are very different. Obviously, they have the husk-covered walnuts, naked buds with these little heart-shaped monkey or ET face vascular bundles are really, really helpful. The bark has very deep, strong fissure patterns, and if you gently scrape it, it's going to be a chocolate brown. And then if you do have access to a twig and you cut it or break it, it's going to have a chambered pith instead of that peanut butter pith, kind of like the underside of a mushroom cap. So think about those little mushroom gills. As Elizabeth mentioned, sumac is on that list as well. There's a lot of different sumac, but just again, they have very similar characteristics to both Ailanthus and black walnut, especially when they're small. Black cherry and all of our fruiting cherries are potentially susceptible. So I just have examples here of black cherry bark, that burnt potato chip or flaky charcoal bark. Their twigs are heavily lenticilled, as well as any young or small stems that don't show this mature bark characteristic. On our wild black cherry, they're going to have these little flower panicles and very, very small, dark black to red cherry fruits that the birds will generally get before you see most of them, as compared to some of our fruiting cherries that have large fleshy fruits with the stone center or the pit, and we do need to take into consideration that this also includes all of our ornamental cherries and plums. So those trees that are really have been going gangbusters for the last month or so in flowering, in addition to our crab apples, are going to be susceptible. Grapes, and so we talked a lot about vineyard grapes, but our native grapevine are also potentially susceptible to this. So if you're a forester or an arborist where you work on large properties or forested parcels, please do take the time to check out your grapes within each season. If you're using them for wildlife habitat, I'm sure there are going to be some folks that are like, great, I don't have to treat my grapevines with my TSI work, but please do monitor. Our birch, the most common one you're going to see in the landscape is river birch. You may also have yellow birch, gray birch, or paper birch, but all have very similar, roughly similar leaf shapes, heavily lenticilled twigs that are generally very dark, kind of purpley black gray, and they have these really great flowers, catkins, in early spring. So you should be seeing those right now. And then it goes back to our Acer. So just like with Asian longhorn beetle, all of the maple are susceptible. These are just some great images of leaves and fruit from some of our more common sugar and silver maple. Maple are going to have opposite branch arrangement. These are the schizocarps, the winged seeds that you see, and just to remind everybody that all maple are potentially susceptible, and that includes from the invasive Norway maples all the way across to the more ornamental Japanese maples and paperbark maples. They're all going to be potentially susceptible. And in our urban areas, those young trees have very thin bark. The other one that was brought to my attention that I wasn't fully aware of was lilac or Syringa species. So both your kind of garden style lilac and your tree form ivory silk lilacs are going to be potentially susceptible to this pest. So opposite branching on the shrub. The lilacs are going to be blooming in the next 2 to 4 weeks, depending on where you are in the US. You may already have your lilacs blooming. And then these ivory silk lilacs, or this style, generally bloom in June to July. And they may actually rebloom in August, depending on where you're at. But this very, very stereotypical lance-shaped, very smooth glaucous leaf, so kind of waxy cuticle, and a fragrant flower is very common between all of your lilacs. Opposite branching on those. Thanks.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to
hand over control to you, Cliff.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So the next pest we want to talk about is the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. Okay. And before I talk about what an adelgid is, I'd like to talk about what an adelgid does. Adelgids are sucking insects that feed on the leaves of hemlocks. And as you know, hemlocks are deciduous conifers, okay, coniferous trees. and they're evergreens. So what happens is that these Hemlock Woolly Adelgids will suck the sap out of the leaves and cause the leaves to yellow, turn brown. They've got a nice siphon-like mouth part, and eventually it robs the tree of all its nutrition, and it causes the tree to die. So you can see in this photo over here, these dead hemlocks have been killed by the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. The next slide is, okay. So what are adelgids? Adelgids are kind of related to aphids, okay? And in this next slide here, yes, thank you. You can see that the aphids. This is an example of a woolly aphid. You might be familiar with the woolly apple aphids that might be on crab apples or hawthorn. But in the next slide, you'll see that hawthorns. I mean that woolly aphids, when they're on conifers, they're called phylloxerans. All right. So what you want to look for are these cottony masses on the undersides of the needles of the hemlock. All right. Now as I mentioned that these things are sucking insects, you might be wondering, why aren't they sticky like the spotted lanternfly or maybe the aphids? And that's because instead of producing a lot of honeydew or liquid excrement, what they're doing is they're producing waxy excrement, and that just covers their body in this wax, and it makes it easy to see. So they've got what they do is they winter is as eggs. Okay, they winter as mated females. The females will produce eggs, and they'll be in March. There'll be egg masses inside the middle of this cottony filament. The cottony filament will then hatch into a crawler stage that will crawl and move on to different parts of the tree and blow onto different plants. Next slide. Yes. So here we see an example of a Hemlock Woolly Adelgid with a lot of eggs that is surrounded by the wax. Each female can lay up to 300 eggs per tree in a lifetime. So that's quite a bit. One of the things you want to look alike, there's a couple of other things that can look like this when you look on these hemlocks. One could be a spider egg sac, and when you look at them much more closely, you might see little spiderlings. Commonly on hemlock, there are white scale insects called like a pine needle scale, and there's also an elongate hemlock scale, which also can be a little bit white in white spots on hemlocks. But those do not have that white woolly wax. Other things that can happen is that there are insects called spittlebugs, but instead of a white waxy substance, what you have is a white foamy substance on the spittlebugs. So it is a real problem for us because hemlocks are a very important part of, especially of the northern forest, mostly in north of Indiana. There are some relic areas in Indiana where hemlocks are a problem, but hemlocks are very common. But they're a really important part of the ecosystem. They shade rivers and streams, and they're really important food for wildlife. Next slide. So what I want to do is put a plug in for this. I'm just speaking very quickly about the different options available for controlling and managing the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. But on May 13th, we're going to have Albert Mayfield, who's going to give us a real detailed update on the latest information here. And I know that recently there's been a little bit of press about a resistant hybrid that is a cross between a Chinese and North American hemlock that seems to be resistant to this. Okay, so with that, the next slide, we want to talk about how do you know you have a hemlock?
That is correct, if I unmute myself.
Great.
So generally speaking, for a lot of folks, especially if you're not in a region where there are a lot of conifers, or if you're very versed in identification of conifers, it can be really tough to tell between evergreens. So I have just 3 kind of form photos here to help you start to key into what a hemlock will look like. They generally have this very delicate foliage, large in part because of the needle size, but they look a little wispy, a little floppy. Some people may say they look a little droopy, but they do have an X-current form, meaning they're narrower at the top and wider on the bottom. What I want you to see in all of these images, no matter whether they're heavily managed, small or large, at the tip of each tree, rather than growing straight up, the apical stems at the tip of the tree actually kind of flop over to the side. So when I'm teaching folks to identify hemlock, I say they're friendly and they wave at you as you pass by. And that might be helpful for you if you could see the top of your hemlock tree. If you're out in a hemlock forest or out in a conifer forest, it may be harder for you to see the very tip of the tree. But in the landscape, that should be pretty visible for you. Let's see if my slide will advance. Boom. Here are some exceptions. There are weeping form hemlocks, and also I've seen more than ever hemlocks, in particular landscapes, being sheared. And so you're not going to see that kind of floppy pendulous foliage or that waving apical tip at the top of the tree when you have a weeping form or it's been physically manipulated by humans. Sweet. So here's an example of one in my neighborhood. She's, I would say, relatively mature, pretty open and sparse. This one has codominant stems, so I'm also waiting to get photos if and when it does fail because of those codominant stems. But you can see here at the top, it's just waving just a little bit, but she's got it going on, and was really, really helpful for me to get some fresh images of all the rest of the hemlock parts. Sweet. So hemlocks have very short needles. This one obviously looks like a little yellow, but what you can tell is these little needles are shorter than an inch in length, nearer to a ½ inch or less, and they do not sit in any particular ranked formation. A lot of times we'll use the needle orientation for identification, but generally in our hemlocks, they kind of radiate all the way around the twig. Generally they stay to the top of the branch, but every once in a while they pop out one to the bottom, 1 or 2 to the bottom. And it gives it a very light, kind of fluffy texture, even though they have very, very short, stubby needles. Again, just another needle arrangement shot where you can kind of see them wrapping around that twig. If you take a branch of your hemlock and flip it over, there are 2 glaucous bands, or 2 white kind of waxy bands on the underside of these little short stubby needles. So on the right is the normal top side of the needle, and on the left, I flipped that part of the twig over, and you can see that it's much brighter white on the underside of those needles. And then the cones. They have itty bitty tiny cones that are generally less than an inch. They're super cute, and they're generally the ones that you find on Christmas crafts. So a very smooth, dry cone that doesn't have a lot of sap or resin on it. It's just a really, really cute little cone with pretty minimal scales, and nothing too pokey or sharp about it. They're pretty delicate. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, I'm gonna pop back in one last time just to talk for a couple of minutes, and we'll answer your questions. So in addition to some of the things we've already mentioned that you can do to stop the spread of these species, we also wanted to remind you that if you see any of these insects, please do send in a report of them. You can do that on the website EdMaps, and that works for the entire United States and parts of Canada. You can also do it through the apps associated with EdMaps. The one for the Great Lakes region where I am is Great Lakes EDN app. You can also call 1-866-663-9684 or 1-866-NO-EXOTIC to report a sighting. Our website, reportinvasive.com, also has a reminder of how you can report invasive species, as well as a lot of other really good information. If you want more details about anything we've talked about today, that's a good place to start out looking. And then finally, you can either email us, so the speakers today, or you can get in touch with an entomologist, a forester, an arborist, anyone who really works with either plants or insects or invasive species in your area. They should know who to get in contact with if you do send in a report. We all kind of talk to each other. If you do have a report to send in, a couple things that are really helpful for us. So first, write down where you are. Be as specific as you possibly can. If you can't be super specific, still send in that report. It's just the more detail, the better. Also, if you can take a picture, that's really helpful for us. When I'm taking pictures of insects, because I tend to take a lot of pictures of things that fly, so Lepidoptera, dragonflies, things like that, I'll usually start taking the picture at a distance, like wherever I'm standing when I spot it, and then slowly creep closer and take another picture with each step I take until I'm right up next to it. That way, if it spooks and flies away, I at least have some record of it. So that's how I would recommend doing it with some of these species. And then if you can collect a sample, please do collect a sample. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. You don't need any sort of special equipment. If you've got a plastic bag or a that you don't crush in any way after you collect it, or an empty water bottle, or really any kind of other small container, those are all great for collecting samples. Then after you get back to your house, please either throw that in the freezer or put it in rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer. And all of those things will keep it preserved until you can get it to us. And with that, just one quick plug. Again, our website has a lot of these details, and we also periodically send out information about invasive species on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram through Report Invasive. We're same name on all three of those. That's all I have. So we're happy to answer questions now.
Okay, we do have one to you, Elizabeth, that Cliff has deferred, about spotted lanternfly. Do they have a pheromone?
So there's all sorts of really cool spotted lanternfly research I didn't get a chance to get into. Maybe is the answer right now. So there's been some work which shows sometimes they seem to be attracted to each other, possibly through a pheromone, sometimes not. So they're still figuring that out, but it looks like there might be a pheromone in play, but we're really not sure yet. As I said, really the last 2 to 3 years, I would say, is when most of the research on spotted lanternfly here in the US has been happening. So we're still figuring it out.
Okay, one of our participants says, I have a white birch in my yard. Should I be worried?
With spotted lanternfly, it depends on where you are. So if you're in an area that isn't currently infested, you're probably okay at the moment. When it does get to you, if you're in an area that it eventually spreads to, I would say kind of keep an eye on your tree. And again, since the management recommendations are being constantly updated and changed, it's hard to say right now exactly what you should do, but I would look into maybe finding a way to protect your tree if it does get to you. Just because we've seen some kind of weakening of those larger trees, like the birch tree you might have in your yard.
I may be, oh, I was going to say, I may be wrong here. This question might have been about gypsy moth.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry too. I didn't make that distinction. So.
Yeah, kind of. Sometimes they came in between the two talks. There's a little
Yeah.
lag time. So I made a mistake about a nebulizer question there too. So it turns out that at this point, if I had a white birch, especially if it was a European birch, I'd be much more concerned about bronze birch borer, right? And so what happens is that somebody asked the questions about does gypsy moth affect oak health in a manner that it can make it more susceptible to other diseases. The answer is yes. You can get armillaria root rot on weakened oak trees. Same way, if you have a defoliated birch tree during an area where there's an infestation, that could predispose that birch tree to an attack by the bronze birch borer as well. So, so if you have a birch tree and there's a defoliation event, you would definitely want to be on the lookout for bronze birch borer in the following year. And it's treated pretty much the same way we treat emerald ash borer, with but these you could treat with a soil injection, a soil treatment of imidacloprid before Memorial Day.
Okay, Cliff, on that same, also talking about gypsy moth here, why are pines and spruces more prone to dying the first year from the gypsy moth outbreak?
Oh, that is an excellent question. And it has to do with the difference between deciduous trees and evergreen trees. Evergreen trees can store in excess of 50%, of more than half of their carbohydrate reserves inside their leaves, all right? Whereas deciduous trees, what they do every fall, as we all know, they drop their leaves. But before they drop their leaves, they take all the energy and the carbohydrate reserves and they store it in their trunk and in their roots in that area over there. So when a deciduous tree loses its leaves, it's losing a lot less of the resources than what it would be losing if it were a conifer. So when a white pine loses half its needles, it's not going to be able to recover because it just doesn't have enough gas left in the tank, so to speak. Not enough energy.
Okay. The one question is, am I correct that HWA only affects hemlocks?
Yes, you are correct. Yes, you are correct as far as I know. I'm pretty sure, yeah. It's a specialist.
Okay. I'm not quite sure. This question says, are outbreaks necessary to kill hemlocks from the Adelgid? I'm not quite sure.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I guess what you mean is that do you need a lot of them to kill a hemlock? And the answer is of course. But the problem with the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is that it's an introduced insect that thrives under our environmental conditions when it's in the presence of hemlock, and there are not very many natural enemies that are here. Okay, there have been several introduced beetles that can attack it and slow it down. There are insecticide treatments that work very, very well against these Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, and there's also some resistant varieties that are being released and trialed. They've been working in the National Arboretum for that for a couple of years. So, but as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, in a few weeks, on May 13th, we're going to have Bud Mayfield, who has been doing a lot of work on Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, and I would recommend that you tune in then to get the latest information.
All right. So this would be for Elizabeth. What trees are not susceptible to attack by the spotted lanternfly?
Oh, so that's the bad news. There are a couple, but they really will try and eat anything. They're not the brightest insects. They've even been found trying to feed on telephone poles. one of the only things, and I know there are a couple more species on this list, but one of the only things that I've heard of that they can't eat is milkweed. But I spoke with someone who did a very, very small, like no replicates experiment, but he had some turf grass and a container without turf grass, and he put lanternfly in each one, and the lanternfly with the grass were able to survive on that for about 2 weeks, and without, they died within a few days. So that really shows you the range of plants that this thing can eat. And again, it has to be something incredibly toxic like milkweed to prevent them from feeding on it. So they will eat whatever they can get their little proboscis into, basically. But I do want to say, that said, there are definitely some plants that they tend to prefer and go to first. So the trees that I listed earlier and the trees that Carrie talked about too, those are the trees that they're going to really swarm on, whereas some other trees, and like the grass example, they're only eating that if they're desperate, if there's really nothing else that they can get. Also, I don't believe they go after evergreens. I don't think they do, but I could be wrong on that. I would have to double check that.
Okay.
You mean conifers? You mean like pines and spruce?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, as opposed to, say, like, a holly, right? Or a rhododendron. Okay.
Yes, correct. Thank you,
Got it.
Cliff.
All right.
Although
now go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to give you, it says, you said that spotted lanternfly is uncommon in its native range. Does this make you feel that classical biological control holds much promise, or do you think that host plant resistance in the native range is the most important factor?
There hasn't been a lot of research done on it in its native range, just because it is so rare. I would lean towards parasitoids, so biological control, being a good way to keep them in check, though. My kind of gut instinct is that that's the reason why their population levels are so low. But again, we really just don't know yet. And so the hope there is that we'll be able to introduce either some of the parasitoids or really get some of the funguses that will attack spotted lanternfly up and running, and really kind of start to keep their populations in check most years. I would be very surprised if we're able to eradicate them at this point, but if we're able, I mean, it would be great if we do, but it seems unlikely. But if we were able to at least get it so that we get those kind of normal waves of outbreaks, and then long valleys where we don't see a lot of them, and then the occasional outbreak again, like we do with native insects, that's kind of what we're going for there. So yes.
Yeah, if I might,
go ahead.
If I might add, I would definitely support that thought. If you think about it like this, emerald ash borer is one of those specialist herbivores that comes in and only feeds on plants in the genus Fraxinus, so that there is a real tight relationship between its ability to handle the poisons produced in plants that grow in its native range versus its novel range in North America. When you look at spotted lanternfly, it's a completely different animal. It's more than the fact that it's a sucker rather than a borer. It has a huge host range. So it can feed on a wide variety of plants. It's probably not too picky on what it feeds on. So it's not going to be, so it's less likely to have that tight of a relationship that would implicate host plant resistance being the main reason for its ability to go crazy here in North America.
Yeah. Thank you, Cliff. That's a great point. Yeah. So in its native range, because it doesn't have that tight relationship, just as you said, the host plants probably don't have specialized defenses specifically for spotted lanternfly. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. Margaret asked, should or could you report pests and diseases if they are not on your own tree, but on your neighbor's? And Carrie answered that by saying, yes, if you can call and ask permission to enter the property to them, report it. If you feel like you can collect enough info without entering the property, also yes. So just in case you think there's something on your neighbors and they haven't noticed it, but you have, that doesn't mean you shouldn't report it. So.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on to that too. If you're out for a walk in a park or even just notice street trees and you think you see some sort of invasive insect or pest insect, please do report it there too, wherever you see it. And in those ways of reporting that I mentioned earlier, you can report any invasive species there. So if you see a feral hog, you can report it through those websites, apps, and phone numbers. If you see an invasive plant, you can report it through that as well. So really, those are general purpose reporting sites.
Okay. So does spotted lanternfly reproduce better when it feeds on Tree of Heaven?
So again, I know I keep saying this, but early results suggest that yes, they do a little bit better, but that said, it looks like they probably can reproduce on other trees as well. They did some really interesting experiments last summer where they had spotted lanternfly in cages at I believe it was Penn State Extension who did this. I hope I'm giving the right person credit there. But they put spotted lanternfly in cages with different types of host plants. And then at the end of the summer, counted how many had survived, the number of egg masses. And then this spring, they're going to look at hatch rate. And they did find more spotted lanternfly survived on the cages with Tree of Heaven than the other cages. But they still had some survival for lanternfly that weren't able to eat anything, weren't able to feed on Tree of Heaven. And those spotted lanternfly were able to lay eggs, they just laid fewer eggs. So Tree of Heaven seems to be better for them so far, but it looks like they probably can lay eggs without Tree of Heaven, and we will know for sure that this spring when we see whether or not those eggs are able to hatch out.
Okay. Thank you. I am not seeing any more questions, but of course, in the email that you will be receiving tomorrow, there will be contact information for all our panelists. And so I would suggest that if you have something you think of later, to be able to, make sure that you reply to them, and they can, our specialists here can answer your questions. And we really appreciate, it's too close to lunch, I guess. Carrie, Elizabeth, and Cliff, thank you so much for this great 2-part series that you've done. We've gotten a great response, and people are very much appreciative of all the information that you have given us. And with that, I want to say thanks to all our participants for showing up and coming, and make sure you check our EAB University webpage on the EAB.info website and see what's coming up next with the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid and sign up for that one. Thank you, everyone.